Isaac Newton. When you hear that name, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably an apple falling from a tree, right? The law of gravity, the scientific revolution. He's basically the poster child for pure, cold reason. But what if I told you that the Isaac Newton we all learned about in school was really only half the story?
See, on the left, you've got the Newton we all know and love, the genius of physics, mathematics, and optics. But on the right, well, that's the other half of his life's work, an obsession with prophecy, theology, and ancient history. And here's the kicker. He wrote way more on these subjects than he ever did on science. It wasn't even close.
You see, this incredible scientific mind was driven by a lifelong and pretty secret obsession. He wanted to decode what he was convinced was God's hidden message to humanity, a message he believed was buried deep inside the Bible. And to him, this was his most important work.
To Newton, the Bible wasn't just a collection of stories or a book of faith. No, he saw it as a massive cryptogram, a kind of divine blueprint where God had actually mapped out the entire future of human history, all of it written in a secret, symbolic code.
But here's the thing, he didn't approach this with blind faith. He came at it like a scientist. He believed that to really get the prophecies, you first had to become fluent in what he called the figurative language of the prophets. This wasn't about guesswork for him, it was all about analysis. He figured, hey, if there are laws of nature, there must be laws of prophecy too.
So how on earth do you crack a divine code? Well, Newton believed you needed a key, kind of like a Rosetta Stone for the scriptures. He set out to create a systematic guide, and he called it the language of prophecy.
And what's so fascinating is just how logical his whole approach was. This language was basically a system that connected the natural world to the political world. He argued that symbols like the sun, the moon, and the stars, they weren't just random poetry. They were consistent codes for things like kings, nations, and rulers.
He literally created a dictionary for it. So when a prophecy mentions the sun, he says that means the entire royal family. The stars, that's the nobility. A beast isn't an animal, it's a whole empire. And a horn growing on that beast, that's a smaller kingdom that breaks off from the main empire. He tried to define everything with scientific precision.
Okay, so let's take his decoding key for a spin, just like Newton did. Let's apply it to one of his biggest case studies, a really famous prophecy from the book of Daniel. So in this prophecy, a king dreams of this giant statue made of different metals. For Newton, this was a clear roadmap of history. The head of gold, that was the first great empire, Babylon. The chest and arms of silver, the Persian Empire, which came next. The belly and thighs of bronze, that had to be the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And those powerful legs of iron, the Roman Empire. For him, it was a perfect one-to-one match right down the line.
But wait, the prophecy didn't stop there. It described the statue's feet as this weird, fragile mix of iron and clay. To Newton, that could only mean one thing. The super-strong Roman Empire was destined to shatter into a bunch of smaller, weaker kingdoms. And he started zeroing in on a mysterious new power that was supposed to rise up from those very ashes. And it's right here that Newton's analysis gets really audacious and pretty controversial. The prophecy talks about a little horn that rises up among these new divided kingdoms of Rome. The question that totally consumed him was, what or who is this final power?
Now, Newton didn't just guess. He acted like a detective. He made a checklist of characteristics straight from the text. This power had to rise after Rome fell. Check. It had to be a different kind of power, not just another political empire. Check. It was described as having eyes, which he took to mean a religious seer, and a mouth speaking great things, suggesting it had the authority of both a prophet and a king. So after he methodically went through his entire list, checking off every box, Newton arrived at one single stunning conclusion. The only institution in all of history that fit every single one of those prophetic criteria, in his view, was the Roman Church. I mean, what a bold and, for his time, incredibly controversial claim to make.
But just identifying the power wasn't good enough for his scientific brain. He wanted to calculate its duration. He was convinced that the prophecy held a precise mathematical timeline, and his calculations all pointed to this one key number, 1260.
He got this number from a mysterious prophetic period mentioned as 1260 days. Then he applied a rule he saw as totally fundamental to how these things worked, the day-for-a-year principle. In this system, one day in a prophecy equals one literal year of history. So it's simple math.
1,260 prophetic days meant 1,260 years of rule. Okay, so this all brings us to the most fascinating question of all. Why? Why did Newton pour so much of his life into this? The answer really reveals the true purpose behind this whole massive project, and honestly, it's a bit of a twist.
Newton himself wrote that the real folly of interpreters was trying to use prophecy to predict the future, as if God was trying to turn them all into fortune tellers. So get this, he believed that actually trying to foretell future events was a complete misuse of the whole thing. So if it wasn't about predicting the future, then what was the point of all this? Well, here's the key takeaway. Newton's goal was to look back at history after the events had already happened and see the proof of a divine plan. He wanted to show, with reason and logic, that history wasn't just a chain of random accidents. It was a grand, logical design. For him, just as physics revealed God's laws in nature, prophecy revealed God's laws in history. So let's end with this thought. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest icons of reason we've ever had, saw absolutely zero conflict between his science and his faith. To him, they were just two sides of the same coin, both pointing to a rational creator. Which kind of leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? Is our modern, strict separation between science and faith just a prejudice of our own time?